For 12,000 years, the Galactic Concord had run the galaxy. It was a club of 7 ancient races who had carved up the universe like a pie, each taking a massive slice for themselves. With thousands of star systems and war fleets that could turn planets to dust, they called themselves the Elder Races. They were convinced they were the masters of everything. The Cathari were the first, so old they'd been exploring the cosmos when other species were still huddling in caves. Their ships were works of art, deadly and built from mysterious materials no one else could figure out. Then there were the Vithkai, the cruelest of the bunch. They'd crushed and enslaved 60 different species, building an empire that stretched across an entire galactic arm with warriors who knew nothing of mercy. And the Drawn? They were the ultimate traitors. They controlled all the trade and information, getting fat and rich off everyone else's hard work. The Marani were the brilliant scientists, unlocking secrets of the universe others couldn't even imagine. The Tassari played the role of diplomats, always speaking softly while hiding daggers behind their backs. The Zoloth were the master builders, whose space stations looked like entire cities floating in the dark. And finally, the Arvani, the Watchers. They saw everything but trusted no one. These 7 powers formed the Concord, meeting at a colossal station at the galaxy's core to make their rules and divide their spoils. They held the power to decide which up-and-coming species got a chance to join their great civilization and which were left to fend for themselves. Their power was absolute, and they never let anyone forget it. So when humanity finally poked its head out from its home system, the Concord barely gave them a second thought. Just another young species from a tiny blue world that had figured out space travel. It was nothing special. Most new species burned out within a few centuries anyway, wiped out by war, plague, or their own stupidity. The Concord watched humanity like you might watch a bug skittering across your floor, with a bit of curiosity, but zero concern. When human diplomats finally arrived at the great station, they showed up in plain clothes, speaking in calm, measured tones. They asked for permission to expand, for trade deals, for a little knowledge and friendship. The Concord practically laughed them out of the room. You're brand new, the Cathari ambassador said, his voice like grinding stone. Your entire existence is a blink of an eye to us. You have to earn your spot out here. The human diplomat simply replied, "We are patient. We're willing to learn." But the Vithkai ambassador, a monster of purple scales and eyes burning with ancient hate, stared at the human in pure disgust. "You're weak," he hissed. "Your people have what, 200 ships? We have 10,000. You have 1 star. We have 8,000. Know your place, little thing." The human diplomat just kept that polite smile on his face and said nothing. In the end, the Concord generously granted humanity a single star system, 1 sun, 8 planets, and a few moons. It was less than they gave to species they considered complete jokes. It was a slap in the face disguised as a gift. Yet, humanity accepted it without a hint of anger. "Thank you for your generosity," the diplomat said. "We will make good use of it." The Vithkai ambassador roared with laughter, his scales rattling. "Make good use of it," he mocked. "Yes, little human, enjoy your tiny corner of the galaxy. Maybe in 1,000 years, if you're still around, we'll consider giving you another one." The human diplomat bowed and walked out. For the next 200 years, humanity did exactly what they promised. They worked that single system for everything it was worth. They ringed their planets with space stations, chewed through asteroid belts for resources, and traded with anyone willing to deal with them. Their ships were a common sight in conquered space, always carrying cargo or passengers, always being polite, always helpful, and never, ever complaining. The elder races completely forgot about them, and that was their first mistake. What secret was humanity hiding? Stick with me to the end to find out. Admiral Yuki Tanaka stood on the observation deck of Earth's command station, gazing down at the beautiful blue marble below. She was 63 years old, but thanks to modern medicine, her body was fit and her mind was a razor. Streaks of silver ran through her black hair, and her dark eyes had a kind of depth that always unsettled the younger officers. She'd given 40 years of her life to the human fleet, and all of that time was spent watching, waiting, and getting ready. "Admiral," her aide said, stepping onto the deck, "the latest intelligence reports from conquered space." Tanaka accepted the data pad, her eyes never leaving Earth. She'd read thousands of these reports. She already knew the story. The elder races were getting bolder. The Vethkai had swallowed up 3 more species in the last 10 years, and the Concord just let it happen. It was the same old story. The strong take, and the weak pay the price. "Anything out of the ordinary?" she asked. "Yes, Admiral." "The Vethkai are gathering a massive fleet. We don't know where it's headed." Tanaka felt that familiar cold knot form in her gut. She knew this day would come. She'd built her entire life around preparing for it. But knowing something is coming and actually watching it unfold are 2 very different things. "How massive?" she asked, her voice steady. 10,000 warships, Admiral, maybe more." Tanaka shut her eyes for a moment. 10,000 ships. The Vethkai had used half that number to completely wipe the peaceful Krellian species off the map 50 years ago. The Krellians had done nothing wrong except occupy space the Vethkai wanted, an entire civilization gone in a month. "Do we have a target?" Tanaka asked. "Not officially, but our sources inside the Dominion." The aide paused. "They think the target is us, Admiral." Tanaka opened her eyes again, looking down at Earth with its swirling white clouds and deep blue oceans. 8 billion people were down there. Billions more were scattered across the stations and colonies in their system. All with families, with lives, with dreams. And out there, in the cold, silent dark, 10,000 warships were on their way to burn it all to the ground. "Have they made it official with the conquered?" Tanaka asked. "Yes, Admiral. The Vethkai Archon addressed the Council this morning. He claimed our system by right of power. He said anyone who had a problem with it could take it up with his armada." The aide's voice was perfectly level, betraying no emotion. No one objected. A fire started to burn in Tanaka's heart. It wasn't fear. She'd left fear behind a long time ago. This was something colder, harder. It was the feeling she got when she saw a puzzle that absolutely had to be solved. "Get my ship ready," she said. "I'm going to the Concord station." "Admiral, is that wise? The Vethkai have all but declared war. The other races have turned their backs on us." "It's necessary," Tanaka said, her voice firm. "The universe is about to change forever. I want them all to remember that we gave them one last chance." The Concord chamber was immense, built to hold thousands of beings from countless worlds. But on this day, it held only the 7 ambassadors of the elder races and their personal guards. They lounged in their floating chairs, arranged in a circle, looking down on the small platform in the center where people came to beg. Admiral Tanaka walked onto that platform all by herself. She was in her simple, black dress uniform, with no medals, no honors, and no weapons. She looked up at the 7 most powerful beings in the galaxy with a completely unreadable expression. The Vethkai Archon, a 3-meter-tall mountain of muscle, scales, and pure violence, leaned forward. His teeth looked like they could rip through a ship's hull, and his claws had personally ended 100 rivals. He ruled his empire with an iron fist and had never met a soul he couldn't break. The human has come to grovel, he boomed, his voice echoing in the vast chamber. How amusing. Tell me, little creature, what will you offer me to let you live? Your ships, your resources, your people as my new slaves? Tanaka just stared at him, silent. Perhaps you've come to surrender, the Cathari ambassador chimed in. His skin was like ancient, weathered rock, and his eyes looked like dying stars. That would be the smart move. The Vethkai aren't exactly known for their mercy, but if you beg nicely, they might let a few of you live. Still, Tanaka said nothing. The Tasari ambassador began to shift in her chair, a feeling of unease creeping over her. Something was wrong with this human. She was too calm. Anyone facing total annihilation should be crying, pleading, trying to make a deal. They shouldn't be standing there in perfect silence with eyes as deep and still as dark water. Well, the drawn ambassador snapped, clearly getting impatient with the theatrics. Speak, human. Why are you here? Tanaka took a single deliberate breath. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet, but it was so clear that it reached every corner of the chamber. I have come to give you a warning, she said. The Vithkai Archon let out a massive booming laugh that sounded like a thunderstorm. A warning? You're warning us. You have 200 ships, human. I'm bringing 10,000. What kind of warning could you possibly give me? I'm warning you to turn back, Tanaka said, her voice never wavering. I am warning you to leave humanity alone. I am warning you that if you attack our home, you will regret it for the rest of your very long lives. The laughter started to spread to the other ambassadors. Even the ancient Cathari cracked a thin, dry smile. The thought of little humanity threatening the mighty conquered was just ridiculous. It was like a mouse threatening a volcano. You're brave, the Archon grunted, the laughter dying down. I'll give you that. Incredibly stupid, but brave. Maybe I'll have your skull polished and mounted on my throne, a little souvenir from the day the humans tried to scare the Vethkai. We are not trying to frighten you, Tanaka replied, her gaze as cold and hard as the vacuum of space. We are trying to save you. For 200 years, we prayed this day would never dawn. We smiled, we traded, we played by all your rules. We did everything we could to live peacefully with your conquered, and in return, you've chosen war. But we haven't chosen war, the Archon corrected her, his voice dripping with contempt. We've chosen extermination. There's a big difference. War suggests both sides might win. You have no chance. You will simply be erased. Tanaka gave a slow, deliberate nod. That's exactly what the Krellians thought, isn't it? They thought they had no chance. They thought they couldn't possibly fight back. They believed the universe was cruel and that the strong would always devour the weak. She paused, letting the silence hang in the air. We are not the Krellians. No, the Archon sneered. The Krellians managed to last 3 weeks. I doubt you'll last 3 days. Tanaka's gaze moved from one ambassador to the next. The Cathari, ancient and full of pride. The Vethkai, vicious and starving for a fight. The Drawn, greedy and bored. The Marani, curious but detached. The Tasari, scheming and deceitful. The Zoloth, solid as a rock and just as emotional. And the Arvani, just watching, waiting to see who'd come out on top. You've held dominion over this galaxy for 12,000 years, she said, her voice steady. You've never once faced a species that could actually challenge you. You've gotten lazy in your power. You've forgotten what it's like to face an enemy that is truly ready for a war. And you believe humanity is that enemy? The Marani ambassador chimed in, a flicker of genuine interest in her eyes. This human's confidence was truly fascinating from a purely scientific view. Was she delusional? Was it some kind of religious fanaticism, or maybe a psychological defense mechanism? I think you're all about to find out, Tanaka said. She turned her back on them and started walking toward the massive chamber doors, her footsteps echoing in the stunned silence. "Wait," the Tessari ambassador called out. "Is that it? You travel all this way just to deliver some vague threats and then walk away?" Tanaka stopped but didn't bother turning around. "I came to look each of you in the eyes. I wanted you to burn this moment into your memory. I wanted you to remember that we gave you a warning." "Warn us about what?" the Archon demanded, his amusement quickly souring into irritation. "What could you possibly do against us now?" Tanaka finally turned. She locked eyes with the Archon, and for the first time, something in her gaze made the massive predator feel a tiny spark of unease. "For 200 years," she said, "you've looked at humanity, and all you've seen is weakness. You've seen a tiny species with a tiny fleet in a tiny little system. You've seen creatures who smile and bow and take your insults without a word of complaint. You've wondered why we're so quiet, why we never push back, why we never ask for more." She took another step closer to the platform's edge. "Well, I'll tell you why. We're quiet because we're patient. We don't push back because we're waiting, and we don't ask for more because we aren't ready." "Ready for what?" the Archon growled. Tanaka smiled. It was not a friendly smile at all. "You really shouldn't have done this. We gave you every opportunity for 200 years. We hoped you would finally learn to see us as equals. We hoped you would choose the path of peace. We hoped we would never have to show you what we've been building in the darkness. What you've built?" The Cathari ambassador leaned forward, intrigued. "What could you have possibly built, human?" "You'll see," Tanaka promised. "Soon. Very, very soon. And when you do, I want you to think back to this conversation. I want you to remember that we tried to warn you. I want you to remember we gave you every chance to just walk away." She turned and headed for the doors once more. "You're completely insane," the Archon shouted after her. "Your entire species is doomed, yet you talk as if you've already won." Tanaka paused at the threshold, looking back over her shoulder one last time. "We haven't won," she corrected him, "but we will. And when we do, you will finally understand something fundamental about humanity. You'll understand why you should never, ever have threatened our children. You'll understand that patience is not the same thing as weakness, and you'll learn why the quiet ones are always the most dangerous of all." With that, she stepped through the doors and was gone. The chamber was silent for a few seconds. Then the Archon burst out laughing, and the other ambassadors quickly joined in. The idea was just absurd. Humanity had nothing. They were nothing. They'd be wiped out within days of the fleet's arrival. But the Tessari ambassador wasn't laughing. She sat perfectly still in her chair, replaying the look in the human woman's eyes. There was no fear there, no desperation, and no fake bravado. It was something else entirely, something that almost looked like pity. The Tessari ambassador was very, very old and incredibly wise. She had seen countless species rise and fall. She had watched entire civilizations turn to ash and new ones rise from the embers. She knew the universe was full of surprises and that the biggest fools were always the ones who thought they knew it all. She looked at the Vethkai Archon, still chuckling over his guaranteed victory. She looked at the other ambassadors, so secure in their power and their scorn, and for the first time in a very long time, the Tessari ambassador felt a cold nod of fear. Light years away, in the human system, Admiral Tanaka's ship streaked through the void, heading home. She sat by herself in her quarters, just watching the stars blur past her window. She thought about the warning she'd just delivered. She thought about the massive fleet that was on its way. She thought about the incredible secret humanity had guarded for 200 years. Her communicator beeped, pulling her from her thoughts. She answered it. "Admiral," a voice said. "The Council has reviewed your report. They've approved the order." Tanaka squeezed her eyes shut. She had hoped this day would never come. She had prayed humanity would never have to show the galaxy what they had become. But the Vithkai had made their choice. The Conquered had made its choice, and now it was humanity's turn. "Begin the awakening," she said, her voice firm. "All ships, all systems, all personnel. It's time." "Understood, Admiral. Beginning the awakening." Tanaka opened her eyes and looked back at the stars. Somewhere out there, in the forgotten spaces between systems, in the dark corners where no one ever bothered to look, humanity's real fleet was stirring. Ships that had been built in absolute secrecy, ships that had been hidden for generations, ships that had been waiting for this exact moment. 200 years of patience, 200 years of preparation, 200 years of smiling at their enemies while building something terrifying in the shadows. The galaxy was about to find out why humanity had been so quiet, and it was going to tremble. The Vithkai armada sliced through space like a pack of starving wolves. 10,000 warships flew in perfect, menacing formation, their engines glowing like angry stars against the black. Each ship was a masterpiece of destruction, armed with technology that had already crushed 60 different species. Together, they were an unstoppable wave of death. Commander Krathel stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the starscape glide by on the main view screen. He was the Archon's hand-picked leader for this mission, a veteran of 17 bloody campaigns. He had personally overseen the extinction of the Krellians, watching their cities burn and their people vanish, and had felt nothing but a grim sense of satisfaction. This job would be even simpler. The humans were far weaker than the Krellians had been. They had fewer ships, less advanced tech, and no one to call for help. Krathel figured the whole conquest would take less than a week, maybe 3 days if the humans were stupid enough to actually put up a fight. "Commander," his tactical officer interrupted, "we will be in the human system in under 4 hours." "Excellent," Krathel replied without turning. "Have the crews ready for battle. I want no delays once we arrive. Should we try to communicate first, sir? Offer them a chance to surrender?" Krathel slowly turned to face his officer. His yellow eyes were cold and flat, like a lizard's. "No." The Archon's orders were perfectly clear. "We are not here to talk. We are here to exterminate. Every single human must die. Every human station must be vaporized. Every human ship must be turned into space dust. When we leave, there will be nothing left to even suggest that humanity ever existed." The officer nodded and went back to his console. He'd expected that answer. The Vithkai didn't do mercy. They believed in power, and true power meant the absolute annihilation of your enemies. 4 hours later, the armada ripped out of faster-than-light travel on the edge of the human system. Krathel stood at attention, ready to give the order that would unleash hell. The view screen showed nothing. Krathel blinked. He was expecting to see defense platforms. He was expecting to see a pathetic little human fleet gathered for one last hopeless stand. He was expecting something to destroy. Instead, there was just empty space. "Report," he snapped. "Where are the human defenses?" "Scanning now, Commander." The tactical officer frantically worked his console, his scales rippling with confusion. "Sir, I'm not detecting any active ships in the system at all. The orbital stations around their home planet appear to be abandoned. No power signatures, no life signs, no activity whatsoever." "That's impossible," Krathel snarled. "There are billions of humans in this system. They couldn't have just vanished." "Commander, I'm picking up some scattered debris in a few orbital zones. It looks like some structures were recently dismantled. The raw materials are gone, but the anchor points are still there." Krathel felt the first icy tendrils of unease twisting in his gut. He had conquered plenty of species. He knew what a civilization looked like when it was getting ready to fight. He knew what it looked like when it was getting ready to run. This looked like neither of those. This was something else entirely. "Scan the planets," he commanded, his voice tight. "Find out where those humans went." The tactical officer complied. Minutes stretched into an eternity of tense silence as the powerful sensors swept across the system. Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, the asteroid belt, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune. Every rock and gas giant was meticulously examined. "Commander," the officer finally said, "the scans are complete. The planetary colonies look like they were evacuated weeks ago. The underground cities on Mars are completely empty. The cloud stations above Venus were ghost towns. The mining rigs in the asteroid belt were stripped bare, as if a pack of locusts had picked them clean. It was almost like the humans knew we were coming and packed up everything valuable before we got here." "That's impossible," Crathville repeated, but his voice was losing its conviction. "Our plans were top secret. Only the Archon's inner circle even knew where this expedition was headed." "Commander, there's something else," an officer called out. "What is it?" "I'm picking up some weird readings at the edge of the system, strange energy signatures way out in the darkness. They don't match any technology in our databases." Crathville strode over to the tactical station to see for himself. The officer was right. Energy sources were flickering to life out there, far beyond the planets, hiding in the empty spaces where nothing was supposed to be. They were faint, barely tickling the sensors, but they were definitely there. "How many?" Crathville demanded. The officer's fingers flew across his console. The scales on his neck had turned a pale, chalky color. A dead giveaway of extreme stress for a Vithkai. "I can't get a solid count. The signatures are too spread out, too numerous, Commander. I think there might be thousands of them." "Thousands of what?" "I don't know, sir." Crathville stared at the data, a cold dread creeping into his gut. Something was terribly wrong. The humans hadn't just run away. They had prepared. They had known this attack was coming, and they had cleared the board of any pieces the Vithkai might take. This suggested a level of intelligence and planning that was completely missing from the Concord's reports. And those energy signatures out in the void. What were they? "Contact the Archon," Crathville ordered. "Tell him the system looks to be completely evacuated. We need new orders." "There's a problem, Commander," the communications officer replied. "Our long-range comms are being jammed. It's like some kind of interference field just switched on across the whole system. We can't send a message out of this immediate area." Now, Crathville felt true fear. In all his centuries of conquering star systems, he'd never met a species that could block Vithkai communications. Their tech was supposed to be primitive. Their abilities were supposed to be limited. Everything the Concord knew about humanity painted them as a minor race, barely worth a footnote in the galactic history books. But someone had just jammed their entire armada. Someone had evacuated billions of people without a single alarm being raised. And someone had hidden thousands of unknown energy sources where they couldn't be easily seen. "Commander?" The tactical officer's voice was sharp with alarm. "The energy signatures are changing. They're getting stronger. Something is happening out there." Crathville whipped his head toward the main view screen. At first, it was just the familiar sea of stars and blackness. Then, slowly, lights began to appear in the emptiness. New lights, moving lights. "What is that?" he whispered. The lights flared, growing brighter. They spread across the screen like a tidal wave, erupting from the darkness in every direction at once. Crathville watched, his horror mounting as the counter on his tactical display began to climb. 100 lights, 1,000, 10,000. The lights just kept appearing. "Commander, I'm detecting ships, human ships. They're dropping out of concealed positions all over the outer system. The count is... The tactical officer trailed off, stunned into silence. The number on the display had shot past his ability to comprehend it. Crathville stood frozen on his bridge, watching the darkness come alive with enemies. Ships bigger than anything he'd ever seen before. Ships moving in perfect, terrifying unison. Ships that had his entire armada completely boxed in with no way out. "How many?" Crathville asked. His voice was barely a whisper. "Commander, the final count is approximately 500,000 warships." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. 500,000 ships. Suddenly, the mighty Vithkai armada felt very, very small. 10,000 warriors had come to wipe out a species, only to find themselves outnumbered 50-1. "That's impossible," Crathville said for the third and final time. But he knew it wasn't. It was just unexpected. For 200 years, humanity had hidden its true strength. They had smiled and bowed and played the part of a harmless young race, all while building in secret, getting ready for the day someone would come to crush them. That day had arrived, and the Vithkai had walked straight into a trap. And across the galaxy, the Conquered was having its own moment of sheer terror. The Arvani were the Watchers. They ran observation posts all through known space, keeping an eye on everything that moved or breathed in the galaxy. Their sensor networks were legendary. Nothing got past them, or so they thought. Senior observer Kthan sat in the main monitoring hub on the Arvani homeworld, staring at her displays in utter disbelief. Reports were pouring in from every single corner of the galaxy. Impossible reports, terrifying reports. Human fleets were appearing out of nowhere. At the borders of Vithkai space, thousands of warships had just decloaked. Near the Cathari capital worlds, more ships had simply materialized out of thin air. The busy drawn trade routes were suddenly locked down by human blockades. Marani research outposts were detecting massive energy blooms where only empty space should be. The Tesseri diplomatic channels went dead as human ships took up positions around key systems. And at the Concord station itself, the galactic center of power, a fleet of human warships had appeared without any warning at all. They just hung there in the void, weapons hot but silent, their intentions a terrifying mystery. "This can't be real," one of Kthan's aides stammered. "Where did they all come from? How could they hide so many ships for so long?" Kthan didn't answer. She was already digging through the data, trying to figure out what they had missed. 200 years of records flew across her screen. Every human ship that had ever passed through conquered space, every trade mission, every diplomatic envoy, every seemingly innocent cargo run. She could see the patterns now, patterns that had been invisible before. The human ships hadn't just been wandering, they had been mapping. Every single journey had covered a different slice of the galaxy. Each route had been meticulously chosen to fill in a blank spot. In 200 years, humanity had secretly created a perfect, detailed map of all of conquered space, including areas the elder races thought were their private secrets. They had also been scouting. The humans had visited every elder race homeworld, every major military base, every strategic choke point. They had scanned defenses, analyzed patrol routes, and identified every single weakness, all while smiling, trading, and acting like a harmless backward species. And they had been building. Kthan could find the traces now that she knew what she was looking for. Faint energy signatures in the dark nebula between stars, shipments of materials that never quite added up at their destination. Resource consumption in fringe systems that was way too high for a small colony. The humans had been building ships in secret, in shipyards scattered all across the galaxy, hidden bases in places no one would ever bother to look, factories that had been churning out warships for 2 solid centuries. 500,000 warships. The number sounded insane, but the math was brutally simple. If humanity had managed to hide just 500 shipyards, and each one produced only 50 ships a year, they would have exactly that many after 2 centuries. Kthan felt a wave of nausea. The Arvani prided themselves on knowing everything. They had watched humanity for 200 years and had seen nothing but a weak, insignificant race. They had been played for fools. "What do we do?" her subordinate asked, his voice trembling. "We do nothing," Kthan replied. "We can't do anything. Look at the numbers. The combined military power of all 7 elder races is about 80,000 ships. The humans have more than 6 times that. If they decide to attack us, we can't stop them." "But why haven't they attacked? If they have this kind of power, why just show it off?" Kthan considered the question. It was a good one. The humans had the power to wipe the conquered off the map. They could have launched a devastating surprise attack and annihilated the elder races before anyone even knew what was happening. But they didn't. They just revealed themselves. They put all their cards on the table without playing a single one. "They're making a statement," Kthan realized aloud. "They want us to see what they've built. They want us to understand exactly what we're up against. They want us to be afraid." Back on the Concord station, it was absolute chaos. The 7 ambassadors were in the main chamber, screaming at each other. The Vithkai Archon was bellowing orders to a fleet that couldn't hear him. He didn't realize yet that Commander Krathville was completely cut off. The Kithari ambassador was demanding answers nobody had. The Drawn were already running calculations on how to profit from this new galactic order. The Marani were just fascinated by the technology. The Tisari were desperately trying to open diplomatic channels with the human fleet. The Zoloth were scrambling their defenses, and the Arvani observer just stared at her data screen, unable to process what she was seeing. "This is an outrage," the Archon roared. "How dare they threaten us? I will destroy every last one of them." "With what?" the Cathari ambassador asked, his voice ice cold. "Your entire fleet is currently trapped in human space. Human warships have boxed in your home world. In fact, they've surrounded every single one of our home worlds. We're in no position to threaten anyone." The Tisari ambassador spoke first. "We have to negotiate. We need to find out what they want. Maybe we can strike a deal." "Negotiate." The Archon's scales flared a deep, furious purple. "I don't negotiate with vermin. I crush them." A new voice cut through the rage, quiet but firm. "You won't be crushing anyone," the Arvani observer said, and something in her tone silenced even the Archon. "I've analyzed their fleet. It's not just the numbers. Their ships are incredibly advanced. Their weapon systems are completely new to our databases, and their propulsion tech lets them fly circles around our fastest ships. Their armor is made of materials we can't even identify." "How is that possible?" the Morani ambassador demanded. "We've been spying on human tech for 200 years. They never showed any sign of this." "They showed us exactly what they wanted us to see," the observer corrected. "They hid their real power while they studied ours. They learned everything about us, and we learned nothing about them." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. "We made a terrible mistake. We thought that because they were quiet, they were weak. We assumed that because they smiled, they were happy. We figured that because they never fought back, they couldn't." "What are you trying to say?" the Cathari ambassador asked. "I'm saying that for 200 years we treated humanity like they were bugs. We dismissed them. We made fun of them. We were literally planning to wipe them out. And this whole time they were getting ready for this exact moment. They knew this day was coming. They knew someone would eventually try to destroy them. And they made damn sure that when that day came, they would be ready." A large screen on the chamber wall flickered to life. The calm, composed face of Admiral Tanaka appeared. The ambassadors went dead silent, staring at the human woman who had warned them this would happen just days ago. "Good evening," Tanaka said. "I told you not to do this. I told you we gave you every possible chance. Now, I think it's time we discussed what happens next." The Archon finally found his voice. "You will die for this. I will personally tear out your— You will do nothing, Tanaka said, her voice never rising but cutting him off completely. The Archon went quiet. Your fleet is surrounded. Your home world is surrounded. Every planet you control is in range of our weapons. You have no leverage, no options, and zero hope of winning. The only real question is whether you'll accept this reality peacefully, or if we have to give you a more direct demonstration of our power. What do you want? The Cathari ambassador asked. He was the oldest among them, and the first to realize their entire world had just been turned upside down. We want very simple things, Tanaka replied. We want a seat at the conquered table. We want equal rights to colonize unclaimed systems. We want to be treated for what we are, a civilization worthy of respect. And we want an apology. An apology? The drawn ambassador repeated in disbelief. Yes, a formal apology broadcast to every world in the galaxy for 2 centuries of contempt and disrespect. You will admit that you treated humanity unfairly. You will acknowledge that we deserve better, and you will promise to do better from now on. The Archon let out a bitter laugh. You have 500,000 ships, and all you want is an apology. You could conquer all of us. Yes, Tanaka agreed. We could. We could wipe out every elder race. We could burn your homeworlds, enslave your people, and take everything you've ever built. We absolutely have the power to do it. We have spent 200 years building the power to do it. She paused, her eyes seeming to pierce right through to the soul of every ambassador in the room. But we are not you. We didn't build this fleet to conquer anyone. We built it to survive. We built it because we knew someday someone like you would try to exterminate us, and we wanted to make absolutely sure that could never happen. Well, that day is here, and you've seen what we can do, but we don't want a war. We never wanted a war. We want peace, a real peace, the kind built on mutual respect, not fear. The chamber was utterly silent. The ambassadors just looked at each other, trying to wrap their minds around what they were hearing. They had braced themselves for threats and impossible demands. They expected the humans to be drunk on their new power, eager for payback after centuries of being pushed around. Instead, they were being offered mercy. You would spare us? The Tasari ambassador asked, his voice trembling slightly. After everything we've done? We would, Tanaka said. If you let us. The choice is yours. You can accept our terms and help us build a new kind of galaxy, one where all species are truly equal, or you can fight us and we will destroy you. Not because we want to, but because we will never ever let anyone threaten our children again. She leaned forward, her expression turning to stone. But understand this. We are only making this offer once. If you refuse, if you choose war, there will be no second chances. We've been patient for 200 years. That patience runs out today. Choose wisely. The screen went dark, leaving the ambassadors alone with their thoughts and their overwhelming fear. The Archon wanted to fight. He wanted to believe that somehow, against all odds, the Vithkai could win. But even he could see the truth now. The humans had outplanned them, outbuilt them, and outsmarted them at every single turn. Fighting wasn't bravery anymore. It was suicide. The Cathari ambassador spoke first. We have to accept their terms. We have no other choice. One by one, the other ambassadors nodded in agreement. Even the Archon, his scales now a dull, defeated gray, couldn't argue. The age of the elder races was over. The age of humanity was just beginning. From the bridge of his ship, Commander Krefel watched death surround him. The human fleet had finished appearing from wherever they'd been hiding. 500,000 warships now formed a perfect sphere around his armada, a solid wall of metal and weapons that sealed off every possible escape route. The smallest of the human ships was bigger than his own flagship. The largest were so massive his sensors could barely process their size. They just hung there in space like giant predators, waiting for their prey to make one wrong move. "Commander," his tactical officer said, his voice barely a whisper. "What are our orders?" Crefel didn't answer right away. He was just staring at the human ships, trying to comprehend what he was seeing. These weren't the clumsy vessels the conquered intelligence reports had described. These were pure weapons of war, designed by a species that had spent 2 centuries preparing for this exact day. The human ships had no wasted space, no fancy decorations, no pointless features. Every single part of their design had a purpose. Their hulls were all sharp angles and dark surfaces, made to deflect sensor scans and soak up enemy fire. Their weapon systems were built right into the hulls, letting them shoot in any direction without having to turn. Their engines were enormous, capable of speeds that should have been impossible for ships that big, and there were just so many of them. The sphere of ships stretched out as far as the eye could see in every direction. Layer after layer of warships, arranged in formations so precise they looked like they'd been placed there by a machine. No, Crefel realized, not a machine. They were placed by people who had practiced this move 1,000 times, who had drilled and trained and prepared for the day they would finally show their true strength. "Commander," the tactical officer asked again. "We wait," Crefel finally said. "We can't fight them. We can't run. All we can do is wait and see what they want from us." As if on cue, a communication channel opened. Admiral Tanaka's face appeared on his main screen. She was sitting in a command chair on her own bridge. She was surrounded by officers who moved with a quiet, calm efficiency. She looked at Crefel with eyes that held no hate, no anger, and no sense of victory. She looked at him the way a scientist might look at a puzzle they had finally solved. "Commander Crefel," she said, "welcome to human space. My apologies for the unusual greeting, but I'm sure you can understand our need for caution." Crefel forced himself to speak. His throat was bone dry with fear, but he was still a Vethkai warrior. He would not show weakness, not even in total defeat. "Admiral Tanaka, it seems I have underestimated your species." "You have," she agreed. "Many have made that same mistake. It's a common error when you're dealing with a people who choose patience over aggression." Tanaka leaned forward just a little. "I want you to understand something, Commander. We didn't build this fleet because we wanted war. We built it because your Archon gave us no other choice. For 200 years, we watched the conquered abuse its power. We watched entire species like the Krellians get wiped out just for the crime of existing in the wrong star system. We knew that someday someone would come for us too. We just decided to be ready when they did." "You deceived all of us," Crefel said. "Your diplomats were smiling while your shipyards were building this armada. Your traders were mapping our territory while pretending to do business. Everything you showed us was a lie." "No," Tanaka corrected him. "Everything we showed you was true. We are traders. We are diplomats. We are a peaceful people who wanted nothing more than to be left alone. But we are also survivors. We've learned the hard way that the universe isn't kind to those who can't defend themselves. So we built defenses. We hoped we would never have to use them. We hoped the conquered would one day accept us as equals. We hoped that peace could be won through patience and good faith." Tanaka's expression hardened. "Your Archon destroyed those hopes. He decided to exterminate our species because he wanted our solar system. He didn't ask to negotiate. He didn't offer any terms. He simply announced that we were going to cease to exist. That choice forced our hand." "So what happens now?" Crefel asked. "Will you destroy us? Will you take your revenge for centuries of being mistreated?" "That depends on you, Commander. and on your Archon, and on all the other elder races who are watching this conversation right now." Krefel blinked. "We're broadcasting this, by the way," the human admiral said, her voice echoing on his bridge. "Every listening post in the galaxy is watching. The entire Concord can see your fleet completely surrounded by ours. They can see the overwhelming power we hold. And now they get to see the choice you're about to make." In that instant, Commander Cavell realized this wasn't just a battle. It was a performance. The humans were putting the entire galaxy on notice, declaring that the old guard was finished and a new power had arrived to challenge the so-called elder races. "What choice are you giving me?" he asked, his voice tight. "A very simple one. You can surrender your entire fleet, and we'll allow you to return to Vithkai space in a single ship. You'll carry our message to your Archon in the Concorde. You will tell them exactly what you saw here today, and you'll give them one chance to accept this new reality without any more fighting." "And if I refuse?" he shot back. Admiral Tanaka didn't answer. She just gave a slight nod to an officer off-screen. A moment later, a small human ship, maybe a quarter the size of Cavell's flagship, broke from the formation. It moved toward a chunk of space debris left over from their arrival. Then the human ship fired. Cavell watched, his blood running cold, as a beam of pure white energy shot from the tiny vessel. It hit the debris, and for a split second, nothing happened. Then the rock simply vanished. There was no explosion, no shrapnel, no cloud of dust. 1 second it was there, the next it was gone. It had been wiped from reality itself. "We call that the nullifier," Tanaka said, her voice dangerously calm. "It breaks the quantum bonds that hold matter together. Anything it hits doesn't blow up, it just stops existing. We have other toys, too. Gravitational lances that can crush a battleship into a metal softball, disruption fields that can shut down every electronic system in a fleet. And then there's something we call the silence, which I truly hope we never have to show you." Kvell's knees felt weak. The Vethkai had conquered 60 species with what they thought were the most powerful weapons in the galaxy. They had never even imagined something like this. "You could wipe us all out," he breathed. "My armada, every fleet from every elder race, you have the power to rule everything." "Yes," Tanaka agreed, "we do. And that's precisely why we're offering you peace." "I don't understand." "No, you wouldn't," she said, shaking her head. "The Vethkai have always believed power is meant to be used, that the strong must crush the weak. You see mercy as a flaw and compassion as a fool's game. We see things a little differently. We believe real strength isn't measured by what you can destroy, but by what you choose to save. We built this fleet to protect our homes, our children, our future. We didn't build it to become the next bullies on the galactic block." She rose from her chair, stepping closer to the view screen until her eyes seemed to bore right into his. "Commander, I need you to listen. This is the most important thing you will ever hear. For thousands of years, the Vithkai have proven your strength by preying on the weak. You've enslaved, exterminated, and terrorized your way across the galaxy. You've never, ever met anyone who could stop you. Until today." She clasped her hands behind her back, her posture rigid and strong. "Today, you met humanity, and humanity is offering you something you've never been offered before, a choice. You can accept our terms and go home in peace, or you can fight us and be utterly annihilated. But let me be perfectly clear. If you choose to fight, we won't stop at your armada. We will hunt you down until the Vithkai Dominion is nothing but a memory. Not because we enjoy it, but because we will never let a species that tried to wipe us out threaten our children ever again." "You'd commit genocide?" Kvell asked, the idea staggering him. The thought was unthinkable. One moment they spoke of mercy, and the next they threatened to erase his entire people. "If you make us," she said, her voice flat. "Yes, that isn't a threat. It's a promise. We've studied your history. We know how the Vithkai treat those who show weakness. You never forget, and you never forgive. If we let your dominion limp away from this, you'll spend the next 1,000 years plotting your revenge. You'll build new weapons, new fleets, and one day you'll come for us again. We simply cannot allow that to happen." Tanaka returned to her seat. "So there's your choice, Commander. You can accept our mercy and convince your Archon to do the same. You can help us build a new galaxy where the Vithkai are partners, not predators. Or you can refuse, and we will begin the process of making sure the Vithkai never threaten anyone ever again. The choice is yours, but I suggest you think very, very carefully. We're only going to ask once." Kvel stood frozen, the silence on his bridge deafening. He thought of his fleet, trapped and helpless. He thought of his homeworld. He thought of his people, who had been taught for centuries that they were the masters of the galaxy. And then an image of his daughters popped into his head. His grandchildren, who were just learning to walk, their future depended on the decision he made right now, not the proud choice, not the honorable one, but the right one. "I accept your terms," he said, his voice heavy. "I will take your message to the Archon, but I can't promise he'll listen. His pride won't let him accept defeat." "I know," Tanaka said. "That's why we're sending more than just words." The main screen suddenly split into dozens of smaller windows, showing live feeds from all across the galaxy. Kvel saw Vithkai space completely blockaded by human fleets. He saw the ancient defenses of the Cathari homeworlds looking like children's toys against the ships now orbiting them. He saw the territory of every single elder race, each one completely boxed in by an armada of human warships. "The Archon is watching this right now," Tanaka explained. "He sees what you see. He knows that refusing our offer means a war on every front. He knows his fleets are outclassed and his worlds are defenseless. He'll make his decision based on that reality." Kvel finally understood. The humans weren't just defeating his fleet. They were dismantling the very idea of elder race supremacy for the whole galaxy to see. They were proving that the old powers were done. "One ship," Kvel repeated, dazed. "You'll let me leave with just one ship?" "Yes. Pick your best people. Take your sensor logs and your recordings. Go to your Archon and show him what you've seen. Tell him humanity is offering peace or extinction. It's his call." "And if he chooses war?" Kvel had to ask. Tanaka offered a smile that held no warmth at all. "Then you should probably say goodbye to your family before you leave our space. Because if war is what your Archon wants, war is what he'll get, and it will be the very last war the Vithkai Dominion ever fights." The transmission cut out. Kvel stood alone on his bridge, the eyes of his crew fixed on him, searching for answers. Behind them, through the main view screen, 500,000 human warships hung in the void, waiting in perfect, terrifying silence. "Prepare a shuttle," Kvel ordered, his voice hoarse. "Select 100 of our best officers. We're leaving." "Commander," his first officer asked, "what about the rest of the armada?" "They will wait here. The humans gave their word they won't attack unless we give them a reason to." Kvel paused, then added, "I believe them. If they wanted us gone, we'd already be dust." He walked to the center of the bridge, taking one last look at the human fleet. They were beautiful in a horrifying way. Their power, their precision, their deadly intent. "Humans," he whispered to himself. "The quiet ones. The meek." He let out a bitter laugh. "We were all such fools. We looked at them and saw harmless prey. We should have been looking closer. We should have seen the tigers they were raising in the dark. Across the galaxy, the transmission ended, but the shockwave was just beginning. The Conquered was in absolute chaos. Ambassadors were screaming at each other. The Vethkai Archon was barking orders at fleets that were already trapped. The other elder races were frantically trying to calculate their odds of survival. But outside, the human fleet simply waited, silent, patient, powerful. They had been patient for 200 years. They could wait a few more hours for the old empires to face the truth. Humanity had just introduced itself to the galaxy, and things would never be the same. The so-called Battle of Saul wasn't a battle. It was an execution. Admiral Tanaka had given the Vethkai Armada 16 hours to surrender. As Cavell departed in his lone ship carrying the humans' final offer, the rest of the Vethkai fleet floated in a state of sheer terror. But the Archon was a creature of pure pride. He was arrogant, and he was furious. From his throne room light years away, he roared a single word: "Attack! All ships attack now! Show these humans that the Vethkai do not bow to anyone." That was the order sent to the Vethkai commanders. They knew it was a suicide run. They knew there was no hope of winning. But they were Vethkai warriors, born for battle and trained to never back down. So they obeyed. 9,999 warships armed their weapons and braced for the charge. They shifted into attack patterns, their engines burning bright as they rocketed toward the human line. Plasma cannons hummed to life, missile pods slid open, and energy shields flickered into existence. They unleashed everything they had. The first wave was breathtaking by any measure. Thousands of missiles blazed a trail toward the human fleet, while plasma shots lit up the void like tiny, angry suns. Beams of pure energy sliced through the blackness on brilliant paths of destruction. Yet not a single one hit its mark. The human ships just sat there, completely still. Tiny objects detached from their hulls, fanning out to form a defensive net. These interceptors were no bigger than a person, but they moved with unbelievable speed and pinpoint accuracy. They locked onto every single incoming projectile and obliterated it before it could even get close. The Vethkai fired over and over and over again, and each time their weapons were completely neutralized before they could inflict any damage. And then the humans answered. A single ship drifted forward from the human formation. By human standards, it was tiny, barely 100 meters long. It parked itself right in the Vethkai's path and switched something on. The Vethkai would later call it the Silence, though that wasn't its real name. Every single ship caught in its range just stopped. Their engines went dark, their weapons cooled, their computers flatlined, their life support systems started to fail. 10,000 warships, the absolute pride of the Vethkai Dominion, were turned into 10,000 helpless hulks drifting in the empty void. The whole thing took less than 3 seconds. The small human ship then simply returned to its place in the formation. Not a single weapon was fired. No missiles were launched. No energy beams tore through space. The humans had taken out an entire armada without breaking a sweat. Admiral Tanaka's voice then echoed across every frequency in the system. "We have shown you our power. We have demonstrated that we could wipe out your entire fleet with a single command, but we chose not to. We have disabled your ships, not destroyed them. Your crews are all still alive, though they'll need to be rescued soon before their life support gives out." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. "This is your last chance, Archon. We are dispatching rescue ships to save your warriors. We will return them to Vethkai space, completely unharmed. In return, you will accept our terms and end this war before it truly begins. If you refuse," she continued, "we will stop holding back. The choice is yours, but you need to make it right now." On the Vethkai home world, The Archon watched the feat of his armada's utter collapse with a rising sense of dread. He had ruled the Dominion for 300 years. He had put down rebellions, conquered entire civilizations, and had never, ever known defeat. He truly believed the Vethkai were invincible. Now he knew the truth. The humans hadn't just defeated his fleet. They had embarrassed it. They had proven that the mighty Vethkai military was less than a bug to them. In front of the entire galaxy, they had shattered the myth of Vethkai dominance. But they had also shown mercy. They could have killed every last warrior in that fleet. They could have turned 10,000 ships into 10,000 floating coffins. But instead, they simply shut them down and offered to save the crews. The Archon couldn't comprehend mercy. It wasn't a concept in Vethkai culture. The strong crush the weak. That was just the way of the universe. Why would anyone show compassion to an enemy they've already beaten? Unless mercy was a different kind of power. Unless showing restraint was even more terrifying than showing pure destruction. Unless the humans were demonstrating something the Archon had never even thought of, that real strength isn't about what you can destroy, but what you choose to save. "My lord," one of his advisors said hesitantly, "the human fleet in orbit around our world hasn't moved. Their ships are holding position, but their weapons are cold. It seems they're waiting for your answer." The Archon stared at the tactical map. Thousands of human ships were parked right outside his window, surrounding his world. Millions of his people were on that planet. His own family was on that planet. If the humans chose to attack, there wasn't a single thing he could do to stop them. He thought about his legacy, about being remembered as the Archon who led his people to extinction. He thought about his children and their children, who would never be born if he made the wrong call. For the first time in his long life, the Archon chose to be cautious instead of proud. "Contact the humans," he ordered. "Tell them we accept their terms." The news hit the galaxy like a tidal wave. The unbeatable Vethkai had surrendered. The Archon, the same leader who had bragged about wiping out humanity, had been forced to bend the knee. The balance of power, stable for 12,000 years, had been completely upended in a single day. In the Conquered Chamber, the remaining ambassadors scrambled to make sense of this new reality. The Cathari ambassador sat perfectly still, his ancient face impossible to read. The Tessari ambassador spoke in hushed, urgent tones with her aides. The drone were already crunching numbers for new trade deals. The Marani were buzzing about the scientific implications of human tech. The Zoloth were frantically reassessing their defense grids. And the Arvani, they just watched, as they always did. Admiral Tanaka's face appeared on the main view screen. She looked exhausted, but relieved. The crisis was over without needless death. That was more than she could have ever hoped for. "Ambassadors," she began, "I think we have a lot to talk about." "Indeed, we do," the Cathari ambassador replied. He was the oldest being in the room, with a memory stretching back millennia. He'd seen empires rise and crumble. He was there when the Conquered itself was born. And now he was watching something entirely new crawl from the ashes of the old world. "You've shown your strength, Admiral. You've proven that humanity is not what we thought. The real question is, what are you going to do with all that power?" "We intend to use it to bring peace," Tanaka said simply. "Real peace, not the fake peace that comes from conquest, where the powerful do as they please and the weak have no choice but to endure it. We envision a galaxy where every species has the same rights, the same chances. A galaxy built on cooperation, not domination. A galaxy that moves forward instead of staying stuck in the past." "Those are lovely words," the Tesser ambassador cut in. She was the sharpest diplomat in the Concord, catching meaning in the slightest pause or shift in tone. But words are cheap. What guarantee can you give us that humanity won't just take the place of the elder races and become the new bullies of the galaxy? Tanaka gave a slight nod. It was a fair point. Power corrupts. Every species that had ever risen to the top had eventually abused its position. Why would humans be any different? I can't offer you guarantees, Tanaka admitted. I can't promise that humanity will always do the right thing or that we'll never slip up. We aren't perfect. We have our own dark history filled with violence, oppression, and cruelty. We know exactly what we're capable of, for both good and for evil. She leaned in, her gaze unwavering. But I can tell you this. We didn't build 500,000 warships because we wanted to conquer anyone. We built them because we wanted to live. For 200 years, we've watched the conquered treat younger species like they were disposable. We watched the Krellians get wiped out. We watched the Vithkai enslave entire star systems. We knew sooner or later someone would come for us, and we wanted to be damn sure that when they did, we could protect our own. And now that you have that protection? The Cathari ambassador asked quietly. Now, Tanaka replied, we want to make sure no other species has to live in fear like we did. It's time to end the age of empires and start an age of partnership. We want to build a galaxy where a species' value isn't measured by the size of its navy, but by what it brings to the table for everyone. The drone ambassador let out a short, ugly laugh. Very idealistic, Admiral, but ideals don't build economies or keep the peace. The galaxy is a huge, messy place. You can't run it on good intentions. No, you can't, Tanaka agreed. That's why we're not suggesting we run the galaxy. We're proposing to join the conquered as equals. We'll share our technology, our resources, and our protection for the good of all. In exchange, we expect to be treated with the same rights and respect as every other member. And if we say no, the Tassari ambassador pressed, then we'll protect ourselves and let the rest of the galaxy handle its own problems. We won't attack you. We won't try to conquer you. But we also won't help you or share what we have. You'll have to face the future alone, knowing humanity is sitting on the sidelines. The ambassadors looked at one another. The offer was crystal clear: partnership or isolation. The humans weren't threatening war, but they weren't begging to be let in either. They were just laying out their terms and waiting for an answer. There's still the issue of the Vithkai, the Cathari ambassador said. They've surrendered, but their nature hasn't changed. They're predators at their core. They won't accept this new way of life easily. No, they won't, Tanaka conceded. That's why we'll be keeping a very close eye on them. The Vithkai Dominion can continue to exist, but there will be rules. First, they must free all of their slave species. Their military must be scaled back to defense-only levels. They have to permit human observers on their planets to make sure they're playing by the rules. If they break these terms, there will be consequences. The Tassari ambassador chimed in. So you'd occupy their worlds? Only as a last resort. We'd much rather see the Vithkai become contributing members of the galactic community. They have skills that could help everyone. Their soldiers are fearless, their scientists are brilliant, and their culture, for all its brutality, has produced art and stories that are truly breathtaking. We don't want to erase them. We want to help them evolve into something greater. That's when the Marani ambassador, silent until now, finally spoke up. She was the analyst of the group, always more focused on hard data than on political games. Admiral, she said, your whole plan hinges on the idea that a species can change its core identity. The Vithkai have been a race of predators for thousands of years. Is it really practical to think they'll just become peaceful allies? Tanaka didn't miss a beat. We don't expect it to happen in a day. Change takes time. It takes generations. The Vithkai alive right now were taught that conquest was their destiny. Their kids might be taught something else if we give them the opportunity to learn. And their grandkids? They might not even remember the old ways. The Marani tilted her head. You plan in terms of centuries. That's not something we see in a species as young as yours. Tanaka gave a small, knowing smile. We had some very good teachers. The Conquered taught us that patience is a superpower. You meant it as a slap in the face when you made us wait 200 years for a second star system, but we took it as a lesson. We learned how to think long-term. We learned to make plans for a future we might not even be around to see. We learned that the slow road is often the safest one. The Cathari ambassador made a noise that could have been a chuckle or a cough. So you learned from our blunders. Maybe that's the real test of a species, not what it builds, but what it learns from the mistakes of others. Perhaps, Tanaka conceded. We certainly made an effort to learn. For 200 years we studied every one of you. Your strengths, your weaknesses, your histories, your cultures, your technology, and your beliefs. We wanted to figure out what made the elder races tick, both the good and the bad. The Tasari ambassador leaned forward. And what was your final analysis? Tanaka took a moment, choosing her words with care. We concluded that you're a lot like us. You're capable of incredible greatness and horrifying cruelty. You've created wonders and committed atrocities. You've reached for the stars and gotten lost in the dark. The only real difference between humanity and the elder races is that you've had 12,000 more years to practice. She stood up and moved toward the screen until her face was the only thing they could see. We aren't better than you. We're not wiser or more moral or more deserving of this power. We're just newer. We have the benefit of learning from your mistakes without having to make them all ourselves. But we also have the drawback of being untested, of not knowing who we'll become when we face the same trials you have. Then why should we trust you? The question came from the Arvani observer, who had been a silent shadow for the entire meeting. You admit you could become just as bad as we've been. You admit that power is a corrupting force and humanity isn't immune. Why should we take you at your word that this talk of partnership will last? Tanaka's answer was simple and devastating. Because you don't have a choice. The old way of doing things is over. We have the power to wipe you from existence, and we have decided not to. We have the power to rule over you, and we have chosen not to. What we are offering is a chance to build something different, something better. You can take that offer, or you can refuse it. But no matter what you choose, the galaxy has already changed. Humanity is here, and we aren't leaving. A heavy silence filled the chamber. The ambassadors glanced at one another, each trying to guess what the others were thinking. These were the leaders of the elder races, beings who had steered the course of galactic history for millennia. And now, they were being told to share their power with a species they had written off as irrelevant just a few days ago. Finally, the Cathari ambassador spoke. Very well, Admiral. Humanity will be officially recognized as the 8th elder race of the Concord. You will have a seat at this table and a say in our councils. Your conditions regarding the Vithkai are accepted, and we will issue a formal apology for our treatment of your species over the last 2 centuries. His voice was thick with the sheer weight of those words. The Cathari hadn't apologized to anyone for thousands of years. The very idea seemed to cause him physical pain. Thank you, Tanaka said, her voice soft but genuine. We accept your apology, and we look forward to working with you to build a better future. The screen blinked to black. The first chapter of a new age had just begun. Back in the human system, rescue vessels were moving through the wreckage of the Vithkai fleet. Human crews were working side by side with the surviving HFY warriors they had just defeated, trying to get life support back online and stabilize damaged ships. The HFY soldiers expected nothing but cruelty and pain, the same treatment they would have given their enemies. But instead, they got medical attention, food, and warm blankets. They got kind words and a helping hand. They were hit with humanity's most unexpected and powerful weapon, compassion. A lot of the rescued HFY were just confused. They had been taught their whole lives that mercy was a sign of weakness. They kept waiting for the trick, the trap, the hidden motive. But there wasn't one. The humans were just helping them because it was the right thing to do and because they wanted to prove the galaxy could be a different kind of place. Some of the HFY warriors looked at the people saving them and felt a flicker of something they'd never experienced before. Doubt. Doubt about everything they'd ever been taught. Doubt about what it meant to be strong or weak. Doubt about the path their entire civilization was on. Tiny seeds of change had been planted. It would take years, maybe decades, for them to sprout. But they were there, waiting for the right moment. The rest of the galaxy was watching. And slowly, little by little, the galaxy was starting to feel a sense of hope. The Treaty of Sol was signed 6 months after the showdown that turned the galaxy on its head. Representatives from all 8 elder races met on Earth in a grand hall built just for this moment. The Cathari arrived in their formal robes that looked like they were woven from starlight. The HFY sent their leader, the Archon himself, his scales looking dull with shame. But his presence was necessary to make the treaty official. The drone brought presents of rare crystals and ancient tech. The Marani came with data pads loaded with proposals for joint science projects. The Tasari were all smiles and smooth words, as diplomats always are. The Zoloth stood there, solid and steady, the builders ready to start constructing a new era. The Arvani, as usual, watched everything, and humanity welcomed them all. Admiral Yuki Tanaka stood at the head of the massive table where history was about to be made. You could see the toll the last few months had taken on her. The stress of shifting from a military standoff to complex negotiations had aged her, but her eyes shone with pride as she looked at the assembly. 200 years ago, she began, humanity came to the conquered to ask for a place among you. We wanted nothing more than the right to exist in peace. You denied us, you laughed at us, you treated us like we were insects beneath the notice of the great elder races. She paused, her eyes sweeping across every single face in that room. Today, we meet as equals, not because we held the threat of destruction over your heads, though we could have. Not because we forced you to let us in, though we did, but because we showed you something the galaxy had forgotten. That power without wisdom is hollow. That strength without compassion is a weakness, and that the true worth of a civilization isn't measured by what it can destroy, but by what it chooses to protect. She lifted the ceremonial stylus that would record her signature for all time. This treaty creates a new concord. It gives humanity an 8th seat at the galactic table. It grants equal rights for all species to colonize empty space. It makes it a universal law that no species can be wiped out just for the crime of existing. And it's a promise from all of us to build a future our children can be proud of. She signed her name with a steady, confident hand. One after another, the other representatives came forward to sign. The Cathari ambassador moved like a glacier, his ancient body protesting every step, but his signature was surprisingly firm. The drone representative signed in a flash, clearly eager to get back to business. The Marani took her sweet time, reading the document with a scientist's precision before she made her mark. The Tasari signed with a dramatic flair, probably already scheming how to use this new order to her advantage. The Zoloth ambassador just pressed his hand to the document, leaving an imprint that would last for ages. The Archon signed last. He stood over the treaty for a long time, his yellow eyes blazing with a mix of emotions humans couldn't quite decipher. There was rage for sure, humiliation, absolutely. But there was something else in there too, something that almost looked like respect. "You could have wiped us out," he said to Tanaka, his voice a low rumble. "You had every reason to. We tried to do the same to you. We wouldn't have shown you any mercy." "We know," Tanaka said calmly. "But we're not you. We never wanted to be you. We wanted to be better." The Archon made a sound that might have been a dry, humorless laugh. "You are a strange species, humans. You build the most powerful military the galaxy has ever witnessed, and then you refuse to use it to conquer. You beat your enemies, and then you help them get back on their feet. You win a war, and then you offer peace. I don't understand you, but I'm starting to think maybe I should try." With the treaty signed, the hall was filled with polite diplomatic clapping. A new chapter in history had begun. The galaxy was forever altered. And deep in the silent blackness between the stars, 500,000 human warships slipped back into their secret hiding places, their mission a success. A decade went by. The galaxy was a new place. Human ships, once hidden, now sailed openly through territory that had once been hostile. Their technology, once a closely guarded secret, was now shared with species who had long looked down on them. You could find human scientists in labs working side by side with Marani researchers, human merchants competing in bustling markets on 1,000 different worlds, and human diplomats helping to settle arguments that had been raging for centuries. The Vathkai Dominion had changed too, though it was a slow and difficult process. As the treaty demanded, all their enslaved species were set free. Some packed up and left Vathkai territory for good, hoping to find a new home with friendlier civilizations. Others chose to stay, trying to forge a new kind of relationship with the ones who used to be their masters. The Archon himself passed away just 3 years after signing the treaty. Some whispered he'd lost the will to live in a galaxy where the Vathkai were no longer the top dog. Others claimed he finally understood the lesson humanity was trying to teach and died of pure shame. His successor, a younger and more practical leader, knew the old days were over. She understood that if they wanted to survive, they had to adapt. Crothville, the commander whose invasion of human space had failed so spectacularly, became the most surprising voice for change. He spent his years traveling from one Vathkai world to another, telling his story to anyone who would give him the time of day. He described the terrifying sight of his fleet being completely surrounded by human ships. He spoke of the shocking mercy they showed to a defeated foe. He talked about the seed of doubt that was planted in his heart that day, a seed that never stopped growing. "I was raised to believe that strength was about conquering," he would tell them. "I was taught that mercy was a weakness, that compassion was for fools. The humans proved me wrong. They had the power to wipe us from existence, and they chose not to. They had every right to get revenge, but they offered peace instead. That," he'd say, "is real strength. That is a power you can respect." Not every Vathkai saw it his way. Plenty of them still longed for the old days of conquest and the glory of war, but their numbers got smaller every year. The younger Vathkai, who grew up in this new era, had never known a time of supremacy. To them, humans weren't the enemy. They were an example of what a species could achieve. The conquered carried on their work, now with 8 voices instead of just 7. Humanity turned out to be a force for stability, never too aggressive, but never a pushover either. When arguments broke out, human mediators were often the ones who found a compromise that left everyone satisfied. When people were being treated unfairly, human advocates were there to speak for those with no voice. And when new dangers appeared from the uncharted regions of space, human ships were always the first on the scene. But humanity never forgot about the power it had built in secret. Those 500,000 warships stayed right where they were, hidden away but ready to appear in a heartbeat. Human children were still taught the history of the long silence, the 200 years their ancestors spent smiling, planning, and preparing. They learned that peace was a precious thing, and it had to be guarded with both strength and watchfulness. The rest of the galaxy started to see humanity in a new light. The elder races had once dismissed them as insignificant, like insects not even worth noticing. Now, they saw something completely different. They saw a species that had turned incredible patience into incredible power. They saw a civilization that had used disrespect as fuel for its motivation. They saw beings who chose mercy when annihilation would have been the easy way out. And in doing so, they started to see themselves differently too. The Cathari, the oldest of all the elder races, began to question traditions that had stood for thousands of years. Why had they always been so dismissive of younger species? What could they have learned if they had just listened instead of always lecturing? The old ambassador who signed the Treaty of Seoul spent his last years writing a book on the failures of his people, a long list of missed chances and pointless cruelties, hoping it would help future generations make better decisions. The doctor learned that trading fairly was, in the long run, way more profitable than just taking what they wanted. When other species were treated like partners instead of property, they became loyal customers and inspired new competition. The doctor economy grew faster under this new system than it ever had before. The Marani realized that science moved forward much quicker when everyone shared what they knew. Human scientists brought brand new ways of thinking to problems that had stumped them for ages. These joint projects led to breakthroughs that neither species could have ever managed on their own. It turned out the universe was more willing to share its secrets with people who worked together. Even the Vathkai, little by little, started to find new meaning in their warrior culture. Some became protectors instead of conquerors, using their strength to defend weaker species from threats lurking in the unknown. Others poured their aggressive energy into sports and contests, which gave them the thrill of battle without anyone getting hurt. A handful even followed Crothville's path, becoming teachers who helped other species understand and control their own violent urges. The galaxy wasn't perfect. There were still fights. There was still injustice. Species still had to wrestle with their own worst habits. But things were definitely better than they used to be. Progress was being made, even if it was slow. 50 years after the Treaty of Seoul was signed, Admiral Yuki Tanaka passed away quietly in her sleep. She had left the military decades before, moving back to the small coastal town in Japan where she was born. She spent her final years in her garden overlooking the ocean, watching the stars appear every night and telling stories to her grandkids. Her funeral was the biggest in the history of humankind. Dignitaries from all 8 elder races came to pay their respects. The Cathari sent their highest-ranking ambassador. The Vithkai sent Crothville himself, now an old man, but a hero to his people. The Drawn brought expensive gifts, and the Marani named a research station after her. The Tassari announced a day of remembrance across their entire civilization, as all of humanity mourned the woman who secured their future. She wasn't just a military genius, the human president said in his speech. She was a philosopher of power. She understood something that many species never figure out, that true strength isn't about what you can destroy, but what you choose to protect. She created the most powerful fleet the galaxy has ever seen, and she used it to build peace. She could have been a conqueror, but she chose to be a guardian. She could have been a tyrant, but she chose to be a servant. The president took a breath, looking at the crowd of mourners from 100 different worlds. Yuki Tanaka saved humanity, but she did more than that. She showed the entire galaxy what humanity could be: patient, powerful, merciful, wise. We will never forget her, and we will spend the rest of our days trying to follow her example. The sun dipped below the ocean, and the stars began to pop out one by one. Each star was a reminder of the massive civilization humanity now helped to lead. And somewhere out there, cloaked in darkness, those 500,000 warships kept their eternal watch. They would probably never be needed again, but they would always be ready, just in case. Because humanity had finally learned the lesson the galaxy tried to teach them 200 years before. The universe is not a kind place for those who can't defend themselves. Peace is a precious thing that takes strength to protect, and patience, when used correctly, is the most powerful weapon of all. 100 years after the Treaty of Seoul, a young human historian came to Concord Station to study the events that had reshaped the galaxy. She spent months digging through archives, reading old documents, watching recordings, and talking to beings who could still remember the old days. When her research was done, she sat down to write the introduction to her book. She thought for a long time, trying to find the right words to capture what humanity had done. She thought about calling it the Great Emergence, or the Peaceful Revolution, or the New Dawn. But in the end, she settled on something else. For 200 years, she wrote, the elder races treated humanity like we were nothing. They told us the stars weren't for us, they laughed at our dreams. They literally drew up blueprints for our annihilation. They figured that because we kept to ourselves, we must be helpless. They saw our smiles and assumed we were simple-minded and satisfied. And because we never pushed back, they were convinced we couldn't. She gazed down at the station's main plaza, a bustling hub where aliens from a dozen different star systems traded and chatted in absolute peace. They couldn't have been more wrong. Humanity wasn't weak. We were just patient. We were preparing. We were getting ready for the day we'd have to prove ourselves to a galaxy that had already dismissed us as a footnote. And when that day finally arrived, we proved it in the most stunning way imaginable. She turned back to her datapad. We showed them mercy. We offered them peace. We taught them that power without wisdom is just an empty threat, and strength without compassion is utterly pointless. We constructed a fleet of 500,000 battleships and used every last one to save our enemies, not to crush them. We won the single greatest war in galactic history without ever firing a single shot in anger. She smiled as she typed the final words. The ancient races learned to be wary of humanity that day, but more importantly, they learned to respect us. And eventually, they even learned to trust us because we showed them we weren't just strong. We were wise enough to know how to use that strength. That is what we gave to the galaxy. That is our legacy. And that's why after all this time, we're still here, still watching, still waiting, still ready, and above all else, still hoping for peace. The historian finished her entry and looked up at the star-dusted void. Out there, in the silent darkness between worlds, the ghost fleet was waiting, patient and powerful, ready to answer the call if it ever came again. But the call never came. With every year that drifted by, it seemed less and less likely that it ever would. The galaxy had learned its lesson, and humanity had been the teacher. Never, ever underestimate the quiet ones. Never mistake patience for powerlessness, and never assume that those who prefer peace are incapable of waging war. Because no one will ever forget what humanity built in the dark. The galaxy shook once. It remembered forever.